Finally, I want to offer some practical tips for choosing songs. Some practical tips for filling those musical bits within your plan for the structure, the liturgy of your service. First of all, is that you can choose hymns that connect with the Scripture. One of the great things about some of the hymn books that we use today is that if you look at the back, you can get a Scripture index. And often as we look through that Scripture index, you can find some of the connections that actually say, well, this hymn or that hymn deals with the particular issue that you find. Following the church year is also a good idea, where in fact you can have hymns that connect or songs that connect with a particular part of the church year, whether that be Advent or Lent or Christmas or Easter, whether it be an anniversary or any of those kinds of things, that sometimes you can find those as well. Of course, the internet is a huge resource for this. The internet is able to have huge amounts of acknowledgement of this. And if you just type in hymn books or hymns for a particular verse, often you'll find those connections as well. One of the hymn sites, or one of the sites that you can use, is called Text Week. So textweek.org. And textweek.org, actually at the end of each text, has got some possible hymn ideas that you can use to say, well, maybe some of these might be useful to connect what I'm saying and what the connection is to what I'm wanting to preach. The other thing that you can do is to follow the content, is to look at the content, read through hymns. The problem is that too often what we do is we just say, oh, I know that hymn, let's use that one. But instead of saying, well, what's in it? Maybe I need to explain some of the words. When you sing a hymn like Jesus calls us, oh, the tumult. Ooh, it sounds okay. The hymn sounds, if you listen to the tune, it's not too bad. But what the hang is a tumult? And unfortunately, most of the people who are in your congregation might not know what the word means. Maybe that's an opportunity for you, that when you choose that song or that hymn, to explain some of it. Maybe to give it an introduction or a context within it. There's a song called a hymn called Take My Life and Let It Be by Frances Ridley Havergal. And sometimes when you say that one, you can say, well, when Frances wrote that hymn, she was in a position where she was at a weekend retreat with a whole bunch of people who were non-churched. And what she was able to do was to say to God, what can I do to help you to actually connect the good news to them? And what came to her were the words of that hymn. Now you could use that as an introduction to the hymn. And so read some of those kinds of things as well. Read hymn introductions. Read hymn outlines, so that you are moved by the content of the hymn, not just how jazzy it is, not just how musical it is. Particularly for those of you who would be organizing worship as a non-musician. Sometimes it can be very tricky as a non-musician to know, well, how can I bring a new song into the place? How can I teach them a new song, especially as a non-musician? Well, there's ways in which you can do that. One is to obviously have a competent musician who is able to lead that process. The other is maybe to find that song or that hymn or that particular music on a CD or on the internet and use that as the vehicle for doing it. Just be careful when you're using songs or CDs from the internet that you deal with the issues of copyright and the way in which you deal with them. But introducing new songs are always tricky. And especially if in fact you are not naturally a musician or a natural singer, it can be difficult to sometimes introduce them. Maybe that's why it's an opportunity to get somebody who then can sing, someone who can play, to actually introduce the song or the hymn so that people can listen, can hear, and then can feel competent to participate and connect with it. The other practical thing is to make sure that when you choose songs connected to the repertoire and the aptitude of the actual congregation. Too many of the modern songs, too many of the modern particular songs really don't work for some congregations because the congregation themselves just haven't got an aptitude for singing them. A lot of the new songs are syncopated, they're kind of off the beat. And so to be able to fit those in and to feel confident with them makes the congregation feel uncomfortable. Maybe, in fact, for the first few times that people hear the songs, it might be useful just for them to listen, just for them to participate by listening rather than necessarily by singing. And then introduce the song again and allowing them to sing it and connect with it. You know, the problem is that when people are too embarrassed to sing, what begins to happen is that they withdraw. And what they do is they not only withdraw from singing, but they also begin to some degree to withdraw from the idea of worship, which then goes against the whole concept of what we're trying to achieve. You know, too often, especially for those of us who are worship leaders and non-musicians, what will happen is that we're often led by the musicians who want to try new things, who are quite keen to try more complicated music. Because for them, part of the music is a performance. They're wanting to perform, they're wanting to show their skills. And that's okay. Except that too often what happens is that worship then all becomes about the musicians showing their skill rather than the congregation entering into worship. I remember that I was told once by a congregational minister, a minister of a charismatic church. I asked him, I said, you obviously don't have any problem with musicians, because he had a number of professional musicians in his congregation. And he said to me, you know what? I never have a professional musician playing in my congregation. So I asked him why. He said, I don't want people who are professional musicians to be playing. I want people to be playing who know that their music is there to aid the congregation to enter worship and not just performance. There are times for performance. There are times when those professional musicians can play, but that's at a concert. That's at a time when their professionalism will be looked at and thought to be great. But in fact, with worship, it's about those who are dedicated to God and are dedicated to helping the people of God enter into the process of worship. Finally, we need to choose music by virtue of the skill of our musicians. It's no use choosing music that's going to trip up our pianist. It's no use using music that in fact the musicians don't know well enough. And if they don't know it well enough, they'll play it in a way which wouldn't show the connection that they need to. And so the congregation would also feel as if somehow they're not quite connected to. The musician and the music that we then connect with needs to be connected to their skill and their ability and their aptitude. That can be a problem sometimes because it can be difficult finding the musicians that we're looking for. In those cases, we can use things like CDs or use the internet if there's a song that's too difficult or too tricky for the musicians to deal with. We need to become creative about how we use music, because music has got a great ability to unite a congregation in worship. But we also need to be aware that in fact music also has a great ability to divide congregations. And so in the choosing of music and in the way in which we choose what we will sing and when we will sing it, let's think in terms of how can we achieve the former rather than the latter.